Kurt Vonnegut said, "Every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water." It's not getting that glass of water that makes the character interesting. It's the obstacles and challenges and the actions that that character takes to overcome those obstacles and challenges. That's really what makes story interesting, what makes characters interesting. In this episode, I'm going to talk about using tension, conflict, and resolution in your game. Let's talk about tension. Tension is one of the most complex literary devices, and it encompasses so many other writing devices that we use all the time. If you were to look at writing forms, you'd probably see tension be described as a sense of dread or a sense of danger or any type of suffering that a character might be going through might be described as a sort of tension. And while that's true, I don't think it covers the entire truth of what tension is in story or in your game. I like to describe tension as anything that creates the need for movement or progress. I guess the best way to think of this is imagine an open chest of treasure and it's just sitting there and the gems and gold and all that stuff is spilling out. Well, there's no real tension there. We can see it. But now think of that same chest. It's in a dark room. It's got this big lock. Now we have tension because we don't know what's in there. There could be anything in that chest. So it gives us the need, the desire to move forward and open it. That's tension. Think of the original character that I mentioned in Vonnegut's quote. The central tension to that idea is his thirst. I'm thirsty, I need to get a drink of water. That is the initial tension they're experiencing. There might be things along the way that obstruct that. The water could be turned off, the pipes could be frozen. There are many different things that you could throw in there to create tension, to stop that character from getting their drink of water. As a game master, how do you use that in your game? There's a lot of ways you can actually use this. The key one I think that most of us kind of know about already is your main villain needs to have a goal or a want that the players are obstructing, because that's creating a tension in your story. That same villain is now going to try to obstruct the players in their wants and desires and their state of normalcy. You want your villain to be able to disrupt the player's way of life and disrupt their goals, kind of keep tension on your players. You want to find ways to disrupt their life, whether it's through the villain or through other means. You want to find ways to deplete their resources, so as they're going from one place to another, they don't know if they're going to have enough food to survive. You also want to try to threaten the things that those characters, those player characters, care about, because all those things are really going to start pushing the players forward. And when they get into these tense situations, it's really going to inspire them to go to new creative heights. Another kind of facet of this too is you want to create many different points of tension for those players. And the reason is that central tension, the big bad, that's going to drag on as you go through the campaign. So you want to have these other points that you can put in there and kind of keep the stakes up for the players. So if we look at the example of Lord of the Rings, we have Smeagol, who has a desire to get the ring. And you have Sauron, who wants the ring back. And then you have Frodo and company, who are trying to keep the ring out of everybody's hands. All these different points of tension just riling around, and it keeps those stakes always up. You ever notice how when you read The Lord of the Rings, there's always this sense of dread and tension and the desire to move on to the next page? Well, that's why, because we have all these conflicting points of tension. Now, there are also ways that players can introduce tension into the game, and these are not as obvious as the tools that the DM has at their disposal. As a player, you could find a reason to want to obstruct the wants and desires of another NPC, or you can work with the DM to kind of bring some of that stuff out from your backstory and create additional tension there. Or you can just create animosity between two of the characters in the party, as long as you both agree and it's something that you're doing that's fun. That could be very interesting to play around with. We've talked about tension a little bit. Let's move on to the next part of that, which is conflict. Conflict is one of those literary devices that is actually part of tension in both writing and in running or playing or designing a game. Conflict is the most used part of tension. This would be the classic protagonist, antagonist, hero, villain type of a story. The tension has now boiled over and has erupted into this direct opposition. Rather than just a locked treasure chest, the thief is now trying to pick the lock and is caught by someone. Or the other side of it, you walk into the room where your treasure chest is and you see this thief trying to pick the lock. Conflict is the manifestation of tension. It puts characters in direct opposition to other characters or ideas or factions. It's not just an obstruction to someone's desire. This is direct confrontation. For game masters, this is the most common way to use tension is, direct conflict. And the most used example would be the players versus the villain. But also think of any other forms of conflict there might be. There might be just a political rival, another party who is trying to clear out this dungeon before your party does. There are many different ways that conflict can be used in your game. And I think a key to using conflict is that there's always a back and forth. There's always a strike and a retaliation. And you want to kind of keep that ebb and flow moving so that there's always a threat, always a danger that there could be a strike on one side or the other. Think of a war movie where, it's always one side will push the other side back and then vice versa. You get a sense of, hey, even when we have these small victories, there's always a chance that they're going to strike next and they're going to push us back. As players, we often don't think about how we can use conflict with our character. And this goes back to picking an NPC to obstruct. You can bring that to a point where now they're kind of a nemesis in a way. Or, there's some type of competition at the local tavern and now you have this conflict between you and another character. It could be love interest. There are many different ways you can kind of play with that as a player. And the way it would come out in that inter-party tension would be like banter back and forth, or, you think of Gimli and Legolas with their constant comparison of their kill counts. Another good example, and I'm dating myself with this one, would be Mad Mardigan and Willow in the movie Willow. They're on the same team, but they're like oil and water. A lot of times they have the same goal. Their principles are very different, so they're always in conflict. The final literary device we're going to talk about is resolution. Resolution is when the tension and the conflict resolve into an answer. The weight has been lifted. The dread is no longer there. You really cannot use tension or conflict without resolution in your game. If you don't have resolution, it doesn't feel like you're going to have progress. Think of the tension as the question and the resolution as the answer. The answer is not always going to be positive for the good guys. Could be an outcome where the bad guys won, but it still has to resolve. The question still has to be answered. And it's very important that any good story or game, campaign, adventure, whatever it is, they all must have multiple points of resolution. You want to have multiple points of tension and conflict peppered in there. You want to be able to resolve those at different times throughout. Now, back to that thief. Our resolution here is he got the gold, he ran away before whoever it was came into the room, was able to stop him. Or, you walk into the room and you see the thief, they're trying to steal your stuff, you thwart them. That's your answer. That's the resolution. As a game master, the easiest example would be the final battle with the big boss. The problem with waiting for that resolution of the big boss fight is you have day one and that's going to be day whatever, it's at the end. But you have all these sessions in between. And that's why it's so important to have all these subplots and all these secondary villains or enemies or anything that the player had in their backstory. Because as you're moving through, you can resolve these other points along the way. Even though all this other bad stuff is happening, we're getting these little wins. And those little wins are going to keep your players going. As a player, it's really hard to work in resolution. This is something you'll have to work out with your GM most of the time. There are other small types of tensions that you can resolve. Befriend or help a minor enemy. That kind of conflict between you and the other party member, you guys come to terms and you resolve that. And all those things, they help the players have fun, they help your game master have fun because you are taking a little work off their plate. And ultimately, you can always be working towards small goals that you can accomplish. And even these, even if it's a new skill, anything like that, can really help create little resolutions that give forward movement. When using these elements in your game, try to remember that tension, when used right, is going to push your characters to take action. The conflict is a manifestation of that tension. And it's when it gets to the point where now your players are in direct confrontation. And the resolution is how they solve that conflict. If this video was at all helpful to you, please hit the like button and share it with someone. If you have any questions or you'd like to ask me anything about these ideas, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.